So imagine a mega tsunami, right? A wave so unbelievably powerful that it completely scrubs the lost city of Atlantis right off the face of the Sahara Desert 12,000 years ago. Just washes away every last stone, temple, canal, everything.
Right, leaving absolutely nothing but mud behind.
Exactly. But sitting perfectly undisturbed right where that megalithic city supposedly stood right on the surface of the geological formation in question is a vast open-air scattering of super fragile 300,000-year-old wooden and stone tools left by early hominids.
Yeah, it's quite the paradox.
I mean, we really have to ask a very simple question today. How does a tsunami powerful enough to vaporize a highly advanced steel and stone civilization just, politely tiptoe around a campsite of ancient, delicate hand axes?
It doesn't. I mean, it flat out doesn't. And that physical impossibility is exactly where this specific investigation begins today.
And we're doing something highly structured for this deep dive. If you've been following the ongoing debates in alternative history, you know there's just this massive ecosystem of competing claims out there.
Oh, absolutely. It's a crowded space.
Yeah, on one side you have institutional mainstream archaeology, which, let's be honest, often just dismisses anomalies outright. And on the other side, you have the wildly popular Tinit, or Atlantis, narrative, promoted by folks like Ken Wheeler, claiming the Eye of the Sahara in Mauritania is the undeniable footprint of an Ice Age utopia.
Which is a very compelling story for a lot of people.
It is. But you, our listener, you are the vital third node in today's conversation. Because we are not just going to sit here and swap opinions about who might be right or who sounds better. We are stepping into the role of a dual-node forensic auditing system.
Right, and our objective for this audit is heavily defined. We are executing a deterministic deconstruction of Wheeler's narrative, but our baseline for this evaluation is crucial to understand here.
Right, we need ground rules.
Exactly. We are not using the standard subjective mainstream historical consensus to judge his claims. And we are certainly not using alternative sort of New Age Gaia theories either.
Because those frameworks just allow for way too much interpretive drift. I mean, you can bend them to fit whatever you want.
Yeah, precisely. Instead, our immutable ground truth for today's state space verification is a highly specific document and mathematical framework called the SS-138 Technical Specification.
Okay, let's unpack that for a second. Because SS-138 Technical Specification sounds incredibly dense. And we really need to be clear on what this tool actually does before we start, feeding historical data into it.
Fair enough. The documentation describes the SS-138 as a deterministic finite horizon edge estimator.
Yeah, let's definitely translate that.
Yeah.
Think of the SS-138 protocol like a ruthless, mathematically flawless nightclub bouncer guarding the door to accepted reality.
I actually think that is an apt way to visualize the mechanism, because in traditional scientific models like academic peer review, this system essentially allows ideas into the building based on consensus, right?
It's a popularity contest among academics.
Pretty much. And if someone sneaks in with a bad theory, the system tries to retroactively hunt them down and expel them through debate and papers. It is a computationally expensive process, and it's highly vulnerable to human bias.
But the SS-138 operates on a completely different architecture, right? It uses what it calls a 12-second macro horizon.
Yes. Which sounds like software, but it's really a conceptual framework.
It basically means the system evaluates every single piece of data right at the door. It demands immediate cross-disciplinary consistency. It doesn't let you inside to explain yourself if your math doesn't check out on the sidewalk.
Exactly. It uses a tri-state logic matrix. So if a theory, let's take Wheeler's Atlantis narrative, perfectly matches physical reality, spatial geometry, and mathematical chronology, the bouncer assigns it a +1. State logic +1.
And you get to go into the club.
You get into the club. But if the theory is a fabrication or if it violates hard physical boundaries, the system does not debate with you. It immediately assigns a -1, a state logic -1.
Which acts as an erasure flag, right? The data is just instantly dropped from the system's processing queue.
Yes, to prevent corrupted logic from entering our structural understanding of history. It demands an integer-based tracking baseline. There is absolutely no room for maybe or partially true in this system.
It's a zero ambiguity filter. I love it. So with the bouncer at the door, let's feed it the first piece of data. We're starting with phase 1, the geological boundary value analysis, the spatial audit.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's process Ken Wheeler's core spatial claim. He points to the Richat structure in Mauritania, this massive, mesmerizing bullseye formation in the Sahara Desert, and claims it is the exact physical footprint of Atlantis.
And he bases this primarily on a visual correlation. Plato described Atlantis as having concentric rings of alternating land and water, and the Richat structure features massive concentric rings of rock.
Right, and Wheeler's narrative asserts that this region of northwestern Africa was a lush, tropical paradise that was utterly destroyed 12,000 years ago during the Younger Dryas climate shift.
Which he tries to support by pointing to the presence of unpetrified ostrich eggs and antelope remains scattered in the surrounding desert.
Right, to prove the lush aspect. But when confronted with the obvious question like, where's the actual city? Wheeler claims it was hit by a massive mega tsunami that literally scrubbed the architecture off the face of the earth.
Leaving nothing behind but mud and the circular bedrock foundation, that is the input vector he's feeding the system.
Okay, so the SS-138 requires us to apply hard spatial constraints to this. We have to begin with the primary source material, right? The actual texts of Plato.
Yes. In his dialogues, the Timaeus and Critias, Plato doesn't just vaguely talk about rings. He provides highly specific geographic and navigational data.
He explicitly states that after Atlantis was submerged, the region became an impassable barrier of mud to voyagers.
Exactly. He wrote that the ocean at that spot became unsearchable because of the shallow mud the island created as it settled. Plato explicitly noted this sunken architecture, and the resulting mud shoal was a severe hazard to naval shipping in his own time.
Okay, wait, hold on. This is where the geography just completely falls apart for me. Plato was writing in Greece around, what, 360 BC?
Roughly, yes.
And he says this mud is a hazard to Mediterranean naval shipping in his era. But the richest structure, the Eye of the Sahara, is located roughly 1,900 miles inland. It's deep in the interior of the African continent.
It's massively far inland.
Right. So how on earth is a sunken mud shoal in landlocked Mauritania bogging down Greek or Egyptian ships?
Well, it isn't. It is a blatant spatial contradiction. According to the SS-138 parameters, you cannot decouple a text geometric description from its navigational context.
It just doesn't make sense.
No, there is no recorded human history, nor any physical mechanism for naval ships sailing across the continental crust of Africa to get to the Richat structure. It's absurd.
And Plato described the geography of the Atlantean plain with incredible structural specificity, too. It wasn't just rings. Didn't he describe a massive, artificially excavated ditch that surrounded the central plain?
He did.
Yeah, I remember looking at the dimensions for that ditch in the Critias. He claims it was 100 feet deep, a stadium wide, which is what, about 600 feet? And 10,000 stadia long.
Which translates to over 1,000 miles in length.
1,000 miles. That is an unfathomable piece of civil engineering.
And something like that leaves an indelible geological scar. You don't just wash away a 1,000-mile trench.
So the SS-138 runs this through its deterministic verification process using the Arcay's geological dataset. We have to ask, what does a hard objective science actually say about the Richat structure?
The analysis proves, both mathematically and geologically, that the Richat structure is a deeply eroded magmatic alkaline complex.
Okay, let's translate magmatic alkaline complex for anyone who doesn't have a geology degree, myself included. We're essentially talking about a subterranean volcano that never erupted, right?
Essentially, yes. It is a subsurface igneous intrusion. Millions of years ago, superheated magma from deep within the Earth pushed upward under extreme localized pressure, but it did not breach the surface.
So it just pushed up against the existing granite and sedimentary crust.
Right, stretching it upward like a massive geological blister. And the immense heat from that magma fundamentally altered the crystalline structure of the surrounding rock, metamorphosing it into diorite and highly resistant rhyolites.
And because it stretched upward in a dome shape, it created radial fractures. And then over immense stretches of time, as that magma chamber finally cooled and depressurized, the center of the dome collapsed inward, acting almost like a piston sinking back down.
Correct. And as it collapsed, and the subsequent millennia of wind and water eroded the surface, it exposed the sedimentary rock layers in those concentric rings.
The harder igneous rocks form the ridges, and the softer rocks erode into the valleys.
Precisely. It was never an oceanic island. It was never carved by human hands. We know this definitively because geologists have thoroughly mapped the outer ring of this specific salt dome.
And what's it made of?
That outer ring is composed of Ordovician sandstone.
But if we look up the dating on Ordovician sandstone?
Geological models date it to approximately 441 million years old.
Wow.
Under the SS-138 framework, even if we were to completely discard uniformitarian geological timelines, and mathematically compress that number by a massive factor, The formation still fundamentally predates any biological possibility of a human civilization by millions of years.
And it's not even a unique anomaly, is it?
No, not at all. It is just the most visible one from space. Geologists have mapped numerous other smaller collapsed domes of the exact same magmatic nature spread throughout that specific region of the Mauritanian crust.
Which brings us right back to the tsunami theory. This is where Wheeler's narrative suffers a massive tracking drift. He has to explain why a supposedly advanced civilization left zero architectural footprint. No canals, no high-quality brass, which Plato called orichalcum,
Yeah.
no ship docks, no temple foundations,
Nothing.
nothing. So Wheeler says a 12,000-year-old mega tsunami scrubbed it away. But when archaeologists surveyed the surface of the rechet structure, what did they actually find sitting right there?
They discovered a staggering density of Acheulean Lower Paleolithic stone tools.
Stone tools.
Yes. The surface is littered with bifaces, hand axes, scrapers, and primitive standing stones. These lithic assemblages reflect ancient hominid populations that utilized ancient stream beds, which once flowed through the valleys of the rings,
And these tools date back to when?
anywhere from 3 million to 300,000 years ago. And there's also sparse Neolithic pottery and rock art sitting directly on the surface as well.
Okay, let's just apply basic physics here.
Right.
Wheeler is claiming a tsunami completely washed away a massive megalithic steel and stone equivalent metropolis, taking massive foundation stones and canal walls with it.
Right.
But somehow, the water was gentle enough to perfectly preserve a campsite of delicate 300,000-year-old stone tools sitting on the exact same layer of dirt. It is a kinetic impossibility.
It absolutely is. The energy required to scour a bedrock city would pulverize or entirely displace surface-level stone tools.
So how does the bouncer treat this?
The SS-138 system categorizes this as an explicit structural deficit. You cannot hold two contradictory kinetic states in the same spatial geometry. Because Wheeler's narrative violates the fundamental boundary values of physics and geology, the bouncer at the door reacts accordingly.
State logic -1.
Yes. The entire spatial claim receives a state logic -1. It is dropped from the active queue.
The geographic argument is entirely dismissed. But the audit doesn't stop there because Wheeler makes highly specific claims about time, too. That brings us to phase 2, the chronological integrity test, the temporal audit.
Let us process the temporal input vector. Wheeler anchors the destruction of his civilization to a very specific timeline, exactly 12,000 years ago, roughly 9600 BC.
Right, he associates this heavily with the Younger Dryas climate shift, which is a verified period of rapid global cooling and geological upheaval.
He does. Wheeler also claims the ancient Egyptians were the direct descendants of this Ice Age civilization, the cultural inheritors who passed the story down to the Greeks.
And that 9600 BC date, I mean, it sounds incredibly authoritative when you hear it on a podcast or in a YouTube video. It feels like hard scientific data.
But we have to look at where that number actually comes from.
Exactly. It doesn't come from a carbon-dated piece of Atlantean pottery. It comes entirely from a conversation recorded in Plato's Critias. The Egyptian priests in the city of Sais are talking to the Greek lawgiver, Solon, and they tell him that Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 years before their current time.
And this is exactly where archaic historical scholarship dismantles Wheeler's temporal anchor. According to the archaic data ingested by the SS-138, we have to audit the actual mathematical tracking systems used by the cultures in question.
I mean, we can't just apply our calendar to theirs.
Right. You cannot arbitrarily apply a modern 365-day solar integer baseline to archaic calendars. The historical record is remarkably clear on this. Numerous ancient authors, Eudoxus of Cynias, Plutarch, Macrobius, and Diodorus Siculus, they all explicitly documented how early Egyptian chronologies functioned.
And what did they find?
They recorded that the ancient Egyptian safe reckoning lunar systems counted a year as a 30-day lunar cycle.
That is a massive distinction. So when the Egyptian priest said year, he was describing what we today call a month.
Precisely.
Why did they track time that way, though? That seems confusing.
It was driven by agricultural and celestial pragmatism. Early agrarian societies relied heavily on the observable phases of the moon to track immediate, short-term cycles of planting, flooding, and harvest. A 30-day lunar phase was the most visually verifiable unit of time.
So it was just practical for them at the time.
Right. It wasn't until much later, as societies required long-term administrative planning across seasons, that they developed complex solar tracking. When you audit ancient chronologies, you must convert the units correctly.
Okay, so let's run the actual math on Plato's text. The priest tells Solon the event happened 9,000 years ago. If the SS-138 deterministic mathematical correction dictates that this actually means 9,000 months, we just divide 9,000 by a standard 12-month solar year.
And what does that give us?
That equals exactly 750 solar years. Atlantis wasn't destroyed 9,000 years before Solon. It was destroyed 750 solar years before Solon.
And the historical timeline allows us to pinpoint this beautifully. Solon visited Egypt around 590 to 580 BC.
So if we project 750 solar years backward from his visit, the mathematical trajectory lands us squarely between 1340 and 1330 BC.
Yes. The subsequent destruction falls directly into the 13th and 12th centuries BC. This simple, mathematically verified conversion completely rips the fall of Atlantis out of the Ice Age.
It places it with absolute precision in the timeline of the Sea People's invasion of the Mediterranean, which historians date between 1276 and 1178 BC, immediately followed by the Great Mediterranean Dark Age beginning around 1135 BC.
Which is astounding because when you read Plato's description with that Bronze Age timeline in mind, suddenly all the bizarre technological anomalies in his text make perfect sense.
Yes. Plato describes the Atlanteans as a civilization that uses iron weapons, constructs massive shipyards with triremes, employs chariots on horse race tracks, and mines high-quality brass. None of that technology existed 12,000 years ago during the Ice Age.
It is historically and archaeologically absurd to place those things in 9600 BC. Horse domestication, for instance, did not begin until roughly 3000 BC on the Eurasian steppe.
Right, not 12,000 years ago.
Exactly. Vast, coordinated canal works, tin mining for bronze, and gold statuary are entirely absent from the archaeological record in 9600 BC. However, if you look at the Mediterranean Bronze Age, specifically the period between 1500 and 1150 BC, every single one of those technological markers is vibrantly present.
Even the brass. I mean, that's specific detail.
Yes, even the brass. The first appearance of high-quality brass, what Plato termed orichalcum in the Mediterranean region, dates exactly to the 1500 to 700 BC window.
That's a perfect match.
Furthermore, the narrative structure of Atlantis perfectly mirrors the Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples were a massive, unified naval federation invading from the west, attacking both Egypt and Athens simultaneously.
Which is literally the exact plot of the Atlantis narrative as told to Solon.
Yeah.
It's a one-to-one match.
It is. The timeline snaps into place flawlessly once you correct the calendar error.
But this raises a huge question about the SS-138 protocol itself. If the math is so clean, and Atlantis is clearly a Bronze Age story, how does the SS-138 handle the 12,000-year Younger Dryas event? Because we can't just ignore the geology, right?
Yeah.
There really was a massive cataclysmic climate shift 12,000 years ago with massive extinction events. What was that, if not the destruction of Atlantis?
To answer that, we have to look at the continuous state-space trajectories the SS-138 tracks. The protocol operates on localized processing phases governed by specific mathematical constants. Two of the most critical are the 138-year reset cycle and the 552-year phoenix cycle.
Okay, the reset cycle.
Yes. When the system models these cycles backward, the phoenix cycle perfectly aligns with and predicts the 1135 BC destruction date of the Bronze Age collapse. The math verifies the history perfectly.
Okay, so where does the 12,000-year mark fit into those cycles then?
Under the SS-138 framework, the Younger Dryas is not classified as a mythological origin point for human civilization. Instead, it is classified as the hardware activation phase of the Global Resonant Synchronization Network, or GRSN.
Hardware activation phase. Are we talking about simulation here or something physical?
We are talking about the physical structuring of our current reality. The SS-138 models the Younger Dryas as a catastrophic system wipe.
The system wipe.
Yes, the sudden violent climate shift, the mass extinctions. This was the process of the Earth's atmosphere and orbital mechanics being locked into their current resonant state. It was a calibration event for the enclosure we currently inhabit.
Wow, okay, so it's setting the physical parameters of the world.
Exactly. According to the system's baseline, the 0.24-degree angular defect in our current orbital mechanics, the wobble that creates our leap years, is a vestigial artifact of the tightening of the enclosure during that exact temporal window.
So true. Continuous human history is a verifiable archaeological data stream, only boots up after this initialization.
Correct.
So if the 12,000-year mark is just the system booting up, why are researchers like Ken Wheeler and even others like Graham Hancock so obsessively drawn to it? Why do they keep trying to shove complex civilizations back into that specific window?
Well, according to the SS-138 audit, they are misidentifying the nature of the data. The
Hmm.
protocol categorizes these massive megalithic anomalies or pervasive ice age deluge myths as ghost signals.
Ghost signals, like echoes in the system.
Precisely. They are remnants of the system's initial boot-up sequence or fragments of a previous operational reality that the current GRSN is still struggling to fully overwrite. What Wheeler is doing is fundamentally a category error. To use a digital analogy, he is watching a computer's motherboard run its BIOS boot-up sequence, flashing basic initialization codes on the screen, and he is pointing at it saying, "Look, there is the highly complex essay I wrote."
Oh, that makes perfect sense. He is confusing the operating system, turning on, with a highly detailed file created thousands of years later on the hard drive.
Exactly. The SS-138 formally categorizes Wheeler's 12,000-year timeline as a systemic anomaly. It is sloppy data management. It attempts to substitute precise, mathematically verifiable tracking intervals, like the 138-year cycles, with a vague mythological placeholder.
And because he completely ignores the temporal boundary conditions, he fails the temporal audit.
Yes, the system assigns a second state logic -1.
The bouncer throws the timeline out into the street next to the geography.
That's right.
Which brings us to phase 3 of the audit. Protocol violation mapping. This is where we look at the linguistic data, specifically the Tinnit axiom. This is Wheeler's signature claim, right? The thing he insists makes his theory totally original.
It is his core linguistic pillar, yes.
He claims that the word Atlantis is just a Greek corruption, and that this advanced Ice Age civilization actually called themselves the Tinnit.
We must apply rigorous boundary verification to this linguistic data stream. First, we establish the epistemological boundary. The name Atlantis exists exclusively within the textual confines of Plato's works.
Right, there's no other mention of it.
None. There is zero independent epigraphic, archaeological, or historical record of a civilization called Tinnit existing in the Saharan region or anywhere else 12,000 years ago. But to fully audit his claim, we have to look at the etymological bridge he attempts to build.
What's the bridge?
Wheeler claims that Tinnit is linguistically linked to the ancient Egyptian goddess Neith, which he subsequently claims translates to the Greek goddess Athena.
Okay, so he's saying Tinnit becomes Neith, which becomes Athena. But let's check the timeline on that Egyptian goddess.
This is where the narrative suffers a catastrophic collision with established chronology. Historical and archaeological scholarship places the absolute earliest appearance of the Egyptian goddess, Neith, at approximately 3400 BC, during what is known as the Naqada II period of ancient Egypt.
Wait a minute. If Neith first appears in 3400 BC, and his civilization was wiped out in 9600 BC.
It is a fundamental contradiction of his own spatial temporal vector. You cannot claim that a 12,000-year-old Ice Age civilization in the Sahara derived its name from or worshipped a deity that would not appear in the human archaeological record for another 6 millennia.
Yeah, that chronological void is insurmountable. It violates the basic integer-based tracking baseline of cause and effect.
It does.
So where did he even get the word Tinnit? Because he didn't just smash syllables together, he pulled it from somewhere, right?
He did, but his application of the word is entirely corrupted. The actual historical footprint of Tinnit, which is much more accurately pronounced and historically recorded as Tanit, belongs to Carthage.
Okay, Carthage.
Tanit was the chief goddess of the Carthaginian Empire, a massive civilization located in North Africa in modern-day Tunisia.
Okay, North Africa, that's geographically closer. But who founded Carthage? Let's trace the cultural lineage here.
Carthage was founded by the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians emerged as the dominant maritime and trading power in the Mediterranean immediately following the Sea People's invasion and the Bronze Age collapse.
Stop right there. The Phoenicians follow the Sea Peoples. The exact same Bronze Age naval federation that the mathematical lunar conversion just proved was the real historical basis for the Atlantis myth.
Yes, and it becomes even more precise than that. The worship of the goddess Tanit did not emerge prominently in Carthage until the 5th century BC. This is during the Hellenistic period.
Which is, wait,
This is the exact same chronological window when Plato himself was alive, traveling the Mediterranean and writing his dialogues.
the irony is unbelievable.
Yeah.
By trying to outsmart Plato and invent a 12,000-year-old Saharan origin, Wheeler grabbed a word that actually belongs to 5th century BC Phoenicians.
He accidentally proved the archaic timeline.
He provided the exact linguistic connective tissue tying the Atlantis myth back to the Sea Peoples and the Mediterranean Bronze Age. That is amazing.
It is a spectacular failure of data ingestion. According to the SS-138 classification, Wheeler's linguistic theory fails the requirement for an integer-based tracking baseline. By inventing etymological connections across a 6,000-year void to create a veneer of originality, he introduces what the protocol formally defines as speculative noise.
Speculative noise, meaning it adds nothing to the signal. It just degrades the resolution.
Precisely. Under the protocol's parameters, this type of etymological leap is classified as a data corruption error. It compounds synchronization errors rather than resolving them. It earns a third and final state logic -1.
So the entire theory, space, time, and language has been completely dismantled by the protocol. But, this raises a much larger systemic question. If this theory is so easily disproven by simply looking at a map, doing basic lunar division, and checking a historical dictionary, why do these competing sloppy narratives exist in the first place?
That is the core question.
Why is the landscape so full of this speculative noise? That takes us into phase 4, systemic context and the GRSN gatekeepers.
To fully grasp this, we have to look at the terminal phase of the SS-138 protocol. At the end of the 12-second macro horizon, the system doesn't just grade the data, it executes a constrained multivariable quadratic optimization routine.
Okay, let's visualize that. A multivariable quadratic optimization routine. It's essentially a mathematical process of finding the absolute lowest point of friction, right?
Right.
Imagine a highly complex topographical map made of data points, and you drop a marble onto it. The routine is the marble rolling down the slopes, navigating all the variables, until it settles into the deepest, most stable basin where there is zero ambiguity and zero kinetic strain. But what does a data optimization routine reveal about the actual scientific ecosystem we live in?
It reveals a profound structural flaw in how human institutions process reality. The mainstream scientific ecosystem is actively hostile to deterministic optimization. We operate under the assumption that mainstream scientific peer review is a process of objective validation, a pure pursuit of truth. But forensically, from the perspective of the SS-138, peer review operates strictly as a process of narrative maintenance. It functions as a proprietary hard lock for the global resonant synchronization network.
You're saying the institutions basically act as gatekeepers for the enclosure.
Precisely. Reviewers in prestigious academic journals are rarely chosen for their ability to radically challenge existing paradigms. They are chosen because they hold established, tenured positions within the paradigm. If you present deterministic mathematical data like the 138-year reset cycles or the archaic lunar calendar conversions, they do not evaluate your math. The system executes a defensive maneuver.
Which is what the SS-138 documentation calls the pseudoscience labeling system.
Yes. By defining mathematically verifiable anomalies as pseudoscience, the gatekeepers ensure that the data is rendered professionally toxic. It mandates self-censorship within the academic community.
Because they're scared of what the data actually says.
Mainstream institutions are fundamentally terrified of linking geological events, like the 12,000-year Younger Dryas, to an engineered infrastructure reset or a cyclical timeline. It is much safer and much less disruptive to the status quo to blame random, uncontrollable variables like a stray comet impact or a natural isolated climate oscillation. It protects the illusion of a linear, progressive enclosure.
Let me synthesize this for you, the listener, because this is where the audit gets really profound. We are essentially caught in a crossfire between two distinct engines of corrupted data. On one side, you have the mainstream institutional gatekeepers. They suppress deterministic mathematical reality, and they completely ignore cyclical history to protect the GRSN enclosure. They want history to be a slow, steady, linear march of progress.
And on the other side, filling the void left by that suppression, you have alternative researchers injecting massive amounts of speculative noise. Wheeler looks at the mainstream's unknown variables, the mysteries they flat out refuse to solve, and instead of applying rigorous math, he adds his own unknown variables.
He piles mythology on top of missing data.
Yes. And both sides fail the SS-138 ingestion interface because neither uses a deterministic mathematical baseline. The mainstream relies on institutional consensus, which is prone to immense drift and bias. Wheeler relies on mythological pastiche, ignoring physical boundaries and kinetic impossibilities.
But the SS-138 strips away both the academic bias and the sloppy myth-making. It demands that an event satisfy spatial geology, rigid chronology, and verifiable linguistics simultaneously. It demands zero ambiguity.
Which means it is time to output our final technical report. We have successfully sanitized the data stream.
What is the definitive conclusion of this audit?
The forensic audit concludes that Ken Wheeler's tinted Atlantis narrative comprehensively fails to meet the hard spatial and temporal constraints of the SS-138 protocol. Spatially, the Richat structure is verified as a 441 million-year-old natural magmatic geological formation, completely devoid of any advanced civilization markers, but littered with Paleolithic tools that violently preclude his washing away event. Temporally, his 12,000-year anchor is a systemic anomaly that ignores the strict 138-year reset cycles and the mathematically verified 1135 BC destruction date derived from documented 30-day lunar year corrections.
Sure.
Linguistically, his application of Tinit is an anachronistic misapplication of a 5th century BC Carthaginian deity that ironically reinforces the Sea People's historical baseline.
And crucially, we cannot default back to the mainstream random comet or linear progress theories as a valid baseline either. Only the SS-138 deterministic standard survives the audit. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about a complex mathematical protocol analyzing an ancient myth about the Sahara Desert?
Because the mechanics of data corruption do not just apply to ancient history, they apply to how you process the reality around you every single day.
Exactly. We live in an era of unprecedented information overload. You are constantly bombarded by mythological grifting and clickbait on one side, and institutional narrative-maintaining gatekeeping on the other. If you blindly accept either stream of information without running it through a strict logical filter, you are allowing compounding synchronization errors to hijack your own mind.
You have to demand a deterministic baseline in your own thinking. You must be your own edge estimator. You have to be the bouncer at the door of your own reality, demanding that the facts align across space, time, and logic before you let them into your worldview.
If you do not actively constrain your inputs with rigorous logic and verifiable physical boundaries, your understanding of reality will inevitably drift into systemic desynchronization. You become vulnerable to any narrative that sounds appealing, regardless of its actual truths.
Well said.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you digest all of this. During this audit, we established that the Younger Dryas event 12,000 years ago was likely the hardware boot-up phase of the GRSN enclosure. We established through the arcade data that true, verifiable human history is governed by inescapable mathematical cycles, specifically the 138-year and 552-year reset cycles dictated by this system. We proved it works backward to 1135 BC. So take a look at a calendar. If human civilization operates on precise, inescapable, mathematically defined reset intervals, how close are we right now to the end of the current macro horizon? When does the next systemic reset begin?